The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters, lawyers, and spectators filled every available seat, their whispers rippling through the air as they discussed the case that had captivated the public's attention for weeks. At the center of it all was one man, Elon Musk. The billionaire entrepreneur and tech mogul who had revolutionized space travel, electric cars, and even social media. Today, he stood in the defendant's chair, facing a lawsuit that threatened to destroy everything he had built. But there was one thing Elon hadn't anticipated: Judge Natalie Anderson. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to let his status or his fame slide him by. Not in her courtroom. The 45-year-old judge, known for her sharp wit and relentless pursuit of justice, was a woman who had risen through the ranks, constantly proving herself in a male-dominated profession. She wasn't intimidated by powerful men, and she certainly wasn't going to let Elon Musk get away with anything, no matter how high his position in the business world. As the gavel struck, silencing the room, all eyes turned to Judge Anderson. She was a striking figure, with her dark hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun, her eyes sharp and calculating behind sleek glasses. The weight of her reputation hung over the room like a storm cloud. No one dared to speak out of turn when she was on the bench. Elon Musk stood, adjusting his jacket, his face a mask of confidence, but anyone paying close attention could see the faint crease of worry between his brows. This wasn't going to be easy. The lawsuit was the result of a controversial business deal gone awry, and now, Musk was in a high-stakes battle to protect his empire. Judge Anderson's voice cut through the silence, smooth but stern. "Mr. Musk, I trust you understand the severity of today's proceedings." Elon nodded, his usual charisma faltering just slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." A ripple of unease passed through the room. The judge's reputation for going after even the wealthiest and most powerful was legendary. In her courtroom, the rich and famous had no special privileges. "You'll find, Mr. Musk, that your wealth, your title, and your companies mean nothing to me in this courtroom," she said, her voice like a blade. "This is not about your reputation. This is about the law. And you will answer for your actions." A slight shift in Elon's posture. He was used to being admired, sought after by politicians, billionaires, and world leaders. He wasn't accustomed to being treated this way by anyone, especially not by a woman who was determined to bring him to heel. But that was exactly what Judge Anderson was doing. "You are being sued for breaching a contract and causing irreparable financial harm," Judge Anderson continued, her gaze never leaving Elon. "This is serious. We'll get to the specifics of your actions shortly, but let me make one thing clear: I am not impressed by your name, your money, or your influence. You will answer for what you've done." Elon's mouth tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced over at his legal team, trying to gauge whether they thought the situation was as dire as it seemed. They had prepared for this day for months, rehearsing every potential outcome, every possible cross-examination. But they hadn't anticipated the force that was Judge Anderson. She was like a storm, unpredictable and relentless. He had been in countless battles before, boardroom confrontations, social media showdowns, and even a few public feuds with powerful people, but this was different. This wasn't a battle of egos or a war over business deals. This was a matter of reputation, of legacy, and of what would ultimately define him as a person. Elon's gaze returned to the judge, who was now shuffling through some papers in front of her. She didn't look up, but her presence filled the entire room. Her reputation was known to all, but only those who had crossed her knew just how intense her interrogations could be. The case was about a failed partnership between one of Musk's companies and a rival tech firm. It had started as a promising venture, with promises of mutual benefit and a bright future. But things had gone wrong. Very wrong. Allegations of breach of contract and intellectual property theft had arisen, and now the case was being tried in front of the most unforgiving judge in the city. "Mr. Musk," Judge Anderson said, her tone cold and authoritative, "I hope you understand that you are not going to be allowed to play the victim here. You will not be able to claim ignorance, nor will you be permitted to hide behind legal loopholes. You will tell this court exactly what happened, and I will make sure the truth comes to light. The spectators in the room held their breath, waiting for Elon's response. They knew this was no ordinary case, and they knew the battle ahead would be something to remember. Elon took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and looked Judge Anderson in the eyes. He had faced tougher situations than this, hadn't he? He had created companies from the ground up, revolutionized entire industries, and now, he was going to face this challenge head-on. Your Honor, he began, his voice calm and composed, I understand the seriousness of the situation. I am here to defend myself and my company. But I also want to make it clear that I did not intend for this situation to occur. We are all responsible for what happened, and I am fully prepared to make things right. Judge Anderson's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. She had heard it all before. She had heard rich men like Elon Musk apologize, defend their actions, and promise to fix things. But the judge wasn't interested in promises. She wanted results. I'm sure you are prepared, Mr. Musk, she said, her voice never losing its edge. But this isn't about what you're prepared to do. This is about what you've done. And we will be getting to that shortly. The tension in the courtroom thickened. It was clear that Elon Musk's confidence was being tested in ways he had never imagined. This wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was a battle for his future. And the fight was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk was no stranger to challenges. From a young age, he had learned to overcome obstacles that many of his peers would have never imagined. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon was the son of a Canadian mother and a South African father. His early years were marked by an insatiable curiosity, a need to understand the world around him. At the age of 12, he created and sold his first computer game, a simple yet innovative creation that foreshadowed his future career as an inventor and entrepreneur. But life wasn't always easy for Elon. His parents' marriage was tumultuous, and he often found himself caught in the middle of their bitter disputes. His father, Elon Musk, was a complicated figure in Elon's life, distant, often cold, and critical of his son's ambitions. Elon's mother, May Musk, was a model and dietitian, who worked tirelessly to support the family. While she was loving and supportive, she also had her own challenges, often having to juggle her career and the demands of raising 3 children. Despite the familial difficulties, Elon's desire to prove himself burned brightly. He had a relentless drive to succeed, to do something monumental. But that ambition came with a price. As he grew older, he found himself increasingly alienated from the people around him. He was an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit in with the other kids at school, and he often sought solace in books and technology. In high school, Elon was an avid reader, devouring books on science fiction and technology. He was drawn to the idea of space exploration, artificial intelligence, and the power of innovation to change the world. He would often stay up late into the night, reading and dreaming about the future. These dreams eventually led him to leave South Africa and pursue his education in Canada and later in the United States, where he would ultimately find the fertile ground to plant his grand ideas. In 1995, Elon moved to the United States to attend Stanford University, but within just 2 days of arriving, he made the decision that would change his life forever: he dropped out. The internet boom was in full swing, and Elon saw an opportunity to create something far more impactful than what he could achieve within the walls of academia. His first startup, Zip2, was a software company that provided business directories and maps for newspapers. It wasn't the most glamorous of ventures, but it was a step towards something bigger. The company was sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million in 1999, and Elon used the proceeds to fund his next ambitious project, X.com, an online payment company that would eventually become PayPal. PayPal was another success story that catapulted Elon into the spotlight, eventually being sold to eBay for $1.5 billion. But while others saw his wealth as a victory, for Elon, it was just the beginning. He wasn't content to rest on his laurels. His true ambition lay in transforming humanity's future, specifically, in colonizing Mars and revolutionizing the way the world produced and consumed energy. At the time of the lawsuit, Elon Musk had already made waves with his companies, Tesla and SpaceX. Tesla had redefined the automotive industry with its electric cars, and SpaceX had taken space exploration into private hands, launching rockets into orbit with the goal of eventually sending humans to Mars. However, these ventures had not been without their struggles. Both companies had faced near collapse, with Elon investing much of his own fortune to keep them afloat. Tesla was often referred to as the car company on the brink, and SpaceX had gone through several failed rocket launches. But Elon refused to give up. He believed in the greater mission, the vision of a sustainable future for Earth and the opportunity for humanity to spread out into the stars. But no success story is without its cost. Elon's personal life had often taken a backseat to his business ambitions. His first marriage to Justine Musk ended in divorce, and the public drama surrounding their split was fodder for tabloids. His second marriage to actress Tallulah Riley had also ended in divorce, though the couple remarried before eventually splitting again. Elon's intense work ethic, his all-consuming focus on his companies, had created rifts in his relationships. He was known for his drive, but it often meant sacrificing the personal connections that many people valued. Despite his professional triumphs, Elon had always struggled with the expectations placed upon him. As a child, he was often the subject of ridicule and bullying, which fueled his desire to prove others wrong. He had learned to tune out the criticism, to push forward regardless of the doubts and naysayers. But the lawsuit he now faced threatened everything he had worked for. His name, his reputation, and his vision were all on the line. The pressure of this moment was more intense than anything he had encountered before. Yet, despite the looming threat of losing everything, Elon remained steadfast. His conviction was unwavering. He knew that he had to fight, not just for his companies, but for the future he believed in. He had come too far, sacrificed too much, and made too many enemies to back down now. This wasn't just about a business deal gone wrong. This was about his legacy, the mark he hoped to leave on the world. As Elon's legal team prepared their defense, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The lessons he had learned, the mistakes he had made, and the relationships he had damaged all flashed before his eyes. But there was no time for regret. He had a battle to win, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer just about the case, it was about the person standing before the judge. Elon Musk's past, his business empire, and his very persona were now under scrutiny. As Judge Anderson leaned forward in her chair, the weight of the moment was palpable. Her eyes were fixed on Elon as if she could read every layer of his thoughts. The gavel had fallen, and the battle for Musk's future was about to escalate in ways no one could have predicted. "Mr. Musk," Judge Anderson began, her voice steady, but her tone unmistakably sharp, "you stand before me, not as a tech mogul or a billionaire, but as a man accused of failing to uphold your promises. You've built your empire on the idea that you are a visionary. But visionaries, Mr. Musk, are held to a higher standard. And today, I intend to test that standard." Elon's face, typically so composed, betrayed a flicker of unease. He had always been in control, whether in boardrooms, on Twitter, or during his public speaking events. But here, in this courtroom, Judge Anderson was a force to be reckoned with. She was methodical, unrelenting, and more than capable of digging deep into the complexities of his actions. "Let's start with the facts, shall we?" Judge Anderson continued, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the papers in front of her. "You promised your investors, your employees, and the world that SpaceX would revolutionize space travel and that Tesla would lead the way in sustainable energy. And yet, here we are. Your companies have faced multiple setbacks, numerous financial crises, and, let's not forget, accusations of reckless management. Why should this court believe that you will deliver on your promises this time? Elon's jaw tightened. The word stung, but he was prepared. He knew what was at stake here. Your Honor, I understand the gravity of the situation, he said, his voice calm but firm. But my track record speaks for itself. SpaceX has brought reusable rockets to reality, and Tesla has redefined the electric car industry. Sure, there have been challenges, but that's part of innovation. Without challenges, there's no progress. Judge Anderson's eyes narrowed. She wasn't here for corporate jargon or self-congratulatory rhetoric. Mr. Musk, she said coolly, you speak of innovation, but how can you expect the court to overlook the consequences of your actions? The failure of this partnership, the breach of contract, and the financial damage that followed, these aren't just challenges. These are decisions that affected real people. She gestured toward the gallery where the plaintiffs sat, their lawyers ready to strike at any moment. They had waited for this day, hoping to see Musk stumble. Elon felt the weight of their gaze, but he didn't flinch. He knew that no matter how much they wanted him to fail, he had to stay focused. I never intended for things to go this way, he said, his voice softer now, as he glanced toward the plaintiffs. But mistakes were made. I've been open about that. And we've worked tirelessly to make it right. We're still working to fix the issues. The financial setbacks? Yes, they're significant, but we've weathered worse. I've personally invested billions to keep these companies afloat. Tesla and SpaceX are far from perfect, but we're not giving up. And I won't give up on making things right. Judge Anderson leaned back in her chair, watching him closely. She could sense the genuine conviction in his voice, but she wasn't convinced. Mr. Musk, you speak of your personal investment, but your commitment to the people who work for you and the investors who believed in you has been called into question. You've had a history of making promises that didn't materialize in the way you said they would. So again, I ask, why should we believe this is any different? Elon's pulse quickened. The pressure was mounting, but he knew this was his moment to prove his worth. Because I've learned from the mistakes I've made, he said, meeting her gaze with an intensity that matched hers. I've put everything on the line for these companies. I've sacrificed my personal life, my health, and my time. I know that I've made mistakes. I'm not perfect. But every failure, every setback, has made me more determined to succeed. I didn't come this far to quit now. Judge Anderson's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. Determination, Mr. Musk, is not enough. You may have learned from your failures, but the question is, did you learn the right lessons? The room fell into a tense silence. Elon's mind raced as he processed her words. Was he really prepared for what was coming next? The pressure was beginning to build up, but he refused to let it show. He had weathered worse storms in business, and he had come out stronger on the other side. Judge Anderson continued her cross-examination. In the past, your companies have faced criticism for a lack of transparency and an over-reliance on public funding. Can you explain why your companies have failed to meet some of the critical milestones you set for them, despite your repeated assurances? Elon's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. He had prepared for this line of questioning, but it didn't make it any easier. We've faced challenges, no doubt about it, he replied. But we've also achieved things that were once thought impossible. SpaceX's reusable rockets, Tesla's market-leading electric vehicles. These are milestones that no one else in the industry has reached. There are setbacks, but that's how innovation works. You push forward, even when things seem impossible. Judge Anderson wasn't impressed by his deflection. I understand the concept of pushing forward, Mr. Musk. But the law isn't about pushing forward for the sake of progress. It's about accountability. You signed contracts, and you made commitments. And now, people are paying the price for your failure to uphold those commitments. The people who trusted you, your investors, your employees, your customers, they didn't sign up for constant delays and broken promises. Elon's mind raced as he grappled with her words. She was relentless. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a battle for his legacy, his credibility, and the future he had worked so hard to build. Judge Anderson's gaze softened ever so slightly, but her words were still sharp. Mr. Musk, I'll give you the opportunity to explain yourself, but make no mistake, this court will hold you accountable. And if you fail to convince me that you are worthy of the trust you've broken, I will not hesitate to deliver a verdict that reflects the gravity of your actions. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was waiting for Elon's next move. His reputation, his empire, and his very future were hanging in the balance. Elon sat motionless as Judge Anderson's words echoed in his mind. The room was alive with the low murmur of whispers from the audience and the sharp click of the court stenographer's keys, but for Elon, the world had momentarily fallen silent. The relentless questioning had chipped away at his usually unshakable confidence, and for the first time in years, he found himself grappling with the weight of truth, the truth that even he, with all his ambition and drive, had failed in ways that could not be ignored. His mind raced as he considered Judge Anderson's accusations, broken promises, failing to meet critical milestones, and, most damaging of all, the perception that he had led his companies without full accountability to the people who believed in him. He had spent years building Tesla and SpaceX with a singular vision, transforming the world and reaching for the stars, but in his pursuit of that vision, he had neglected to fully consider the consequences of his decisions. The pressure to succeed, the constant need to prove his worth to the world, had clouded his judgment at times. Elon exhaled deeply and turned his gaze toward the judge. The battle was far from over, but he knew it was time to face the hard truth. Your Honor, Elon said, his voice measured but laced with the fatigue of the past few days, you're right. I've made mistakes. I've failed in ways that hurt not only the companies I built but also the people who trusted me. And I owe them an explanation. Judge Anderson leaned forward, watching him intently, as though waiting for something more. I didn't always make the right decisions, but every failure has been a lesson, Elon continued. I pushed my teams beyond their limits, believing that would lead to greatness. I pushed myself to the brink, thinking that if I just worked harder, I could pull off the impossible. But in doing so, I overlooked the importance of balance, of ensuring that I didn't just build technology, I also needed to build trust with the people around me. My obsession with speed, with the next big thing, sometimes meant that I didn't communicate the reality of our challenges. I didn't take the time to make sure the people I relied on were always on the same page. I failed to meet the expectations I set for myself, and by extension, the people who believed in what we were doing. Judge Anderson remained silent, watching him with unwavering intensity. Her expression was unreadable, but the way she observed him suggested that she wasn't about to let him off the hook easily. For the first time in this trial, Elon felt like he was standing in the eye of the storm, no longer trying to outpace the questions but instead acknowledging the damage he had caused. I was always focused on the end goal, he continued, but I forgot about the people who were walking alongside me. Without them, nothing would have ever come to life. And for that, I'm deeply sorry. I can't change the past, but I'm committed to changing the way I lead from here on out. The weight of his own words hung in the air as the courtroom became deathly quiet. Even his legal team, usually so composed, seemed to take a collective breath, as if waiting for Judge Anderson's next move. Elon had never been one to reveal vulnerability, but here, in the face of everything he had built and everything he might lose, he realized that true leadership required more than just being right, it required honesty, humility, and the courage to admit when you've been wrong. Judge Anderson leaned back in her chair, her gaze never leaving him. She was processing, calculating how much of this new side of Elon Musk she could believe. The courtroom was still, but her mind was racing through every word Elon had said, examining it for any signs of manipulation, any trace of a defense that wasn't genuine. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Musk, she said, her voice firm but not unkind, acknowledging your mistakes is the first step. But this court is here to hold you accountable, not just for your mistakes, but for your actions. You've built an empire, yes, but that empire wasn't built on just good intentions. It was built on promises, and now, those promises need to be answered. Your vision, your ambition, no one here is questioning that. But you've made decisions that have affected the lives of people, real people, whose livelihoods depend on whether or not your companies succeed. Elon nodded slowly. He knew what she was saying was true. For all his accomplishments, for all the progress he had made, he had hurt people in ways that couldn't be undone by a speech. His personal ambition and the burning desire to change the world had, at times, come at the expense of those who worked for him. It had come at the expense of their trust. Judge Anderson continued. I will allow your team to present further evidence of your commitment to correct these wrongs. But make no mistake, Mr. Musk, actions speak louder than words. You've built your companies on innovation, on doing what others said couldn't be done. But now, you need to do what others didn't expect you to do, fix the damage you've caused and show the world that your vision doesn't come at the cost of honesty, integrity, and responsibility. Elon felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about defending his companies, it was about defending the very principles that had gotten him here in the first place. He had made mistakes, yes, but if he was going to come out of this trial with his reputation intact, he had to prove that he was capable of change, not just in the technology he created, but in the way he led. As the judge moved on to the next phase of the trial, Elon's thoughts lingered on the reality of what he had just faced. It was one thing to be challenged in the business world, but here, in a courtroom, with his future on the line, he had been forced to confront the most difficult truth of all, that the cost of greatness wasn't just measured in innovation or success, but in how you treated the people who helped you build it. The rest of the day passed in a blur as the proceedings continued. Elon's legal team had prepared to present their defense, but the damage had already been done. His vulnerabilities had been exposed. The future of Tesla and SpaceX no longer seemed so certain. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the proceedings entered a new phase. Elon had just laid bare his vulnerabilities, and Judge Anderson had responded with the sharp scrutiny that only a seasoned judge could wield. The next few hours would determine whether Elon Musk's self-reflection would be enough to shift the course of the trial, or if the court would stand firm in holding him accountable for his actions. His legal team was now in the hot seat, tasked with rebuilding the narrative that Elon had so openly shattered. Elon sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the room settle on him. The soft murmur of conversations between lawyers filled the air, but for him, it was as though time had slowed. His thoughts drifted between his past triumphs and failures, SpaceX's rocky beginnings, the electric revolution Tesla had sparked, and the promise he had made to the world to push humanity forward. But he also couldn't shake the unsettling truth, his empire was now at risk, not just from external forces but from his own mistakes. His defense attorney, Patricia James, a seasoned litigator with a reputation for handling high-profile cases, stood up and made her way toward the podium. Her briefcase clicked open with a definitive sound as she prepared to present their case. She exuded an air of calm confidence, but even Elon could sense the tension in the room. This was her moment to convince Judge Anderson, and the world, that Elon Musk was not just a billionaire mogul trying to evade consequences, but a man who, despite his faults, was committed to correcting his course. Your Honor, Patricia began, her voice clear and commanding, we've heard Mr. Musk's acknowledgement of his mistakes. And while we appreciate his transparency, we must also emphasize that these mistakes are not the full story. The fact is, SpaceX and Tesla were born from the kind of ambition that very few in this world possess, the ambition to change the world, to reshape industries, and to challenge the very laws of what was thought possible. Patricia paused, letting her words sink in. She glanced over at Elon, who offered a small nod of encouragement. He knew the battle wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning of their counteroffensive. Mr. Musk's track record is not one of reckless behavior, Patricia continued. Rather, it is a record of relentless innovation and daring to take on challenges that others deemed impossible. Yes, there were failures, there always are when you are pushing the limits of what is achievable. But we are here because of those very risks, because of the things that others said couldn't be done. SpaceX didn't just land a rocket, it revolutionized space travel. Tesla didn't just create an electric car, it created an entirely new category. These are monumental achievements that the world has never seen before. The defense team began to lay out their argument for why Elon Musk should be viewed through a different lens. Patricia emphasized that, while there were certainly mistakes, those mistakes were part of the process of innovation. The cost of breaking through barriers was not always measured in dollars or milestones but in the setbacks that inevitably came when someone dared to lead where no one else would. Elon's heart began to steady as he listened. Patricia's arguments weren't just about defending his reputation, they were about recognizing the broader context in which he had worked. It wasn't about denying the mistakes, but about framing them as necessary for the grand vision he had set in motion. Furthermore, Patricia added, the very people who now seek to hold Mr. Musk accountable, his investors, employees, and customers, have reaped the rewards of those risks. SpaceX has achieved milestones that no one thought possible, and Tesla has disrupted not one, but several industries. Mr. Musk has invested his own money, countless hours, and unwavering dedication into making these companies succeed. When the chips were down, he didn't walk away. He stood firm, as any leader would, and continued to fight for the very vision he had started. Patricia's eyes swept across the room, her gaze meeting Judge Anderson's. The plaintiffs here today want to hold Mr. Musk accountable for delays, failures, and financial losses. But what they don't see is the vision, the unwavering belief in the impossible. You don't build an empire by playing it safe. You build it by challenging everything. Elon could see Judge Anderson listening carefully, but her expression remained impassive. It was impossible to tell whether she was swayed by Patricia's words. The judge had seen the rise and fall of many high-profile figures, and she knew the difference between a truly transformative leader and someone simply trying to escape the consequences of their actions. Patricia wasn't done yet. Your Honor, we also cannot ignore the fact that Mr. Musk has been transparent in his efforts to fix the issues that have arisen. He has taken personal responsibility for the mistakes, and he has worked tirelessly to rectify the situation. In fact, we submit evidence showing that Mr. Musk has not only provided additional funding but has also made significant adjustments to the management structure in both Tesla and SpaceX to ensure that these issues are addressed. These are not the actions of a man who is seeking to avoid accountability. These are the actions of a man who is trying to do right by those who have trusted him. Patricia moved toward the podium with a stack of documents, presenting evidence that included letters from investors praising Musk's commitment, testimony from key employees who vouched for his leadership, and internal reports showing that both SpaceX and Tesla were working to overcome their struggles. While the damages were certainly substantial, it was clear that Elon had not walked away from the challenges, he had confronted them head-on. The courtroom fell into a brief silence as the evidence was passed around. It was clear that Patricia had made a compelling case, but whether it would be enough to sway Judge Anderson remained uncertain. Elon's mind was racing. The weight of the trial was not just on his shoulders but on the future of everything he had worked for. This was his chance, not just to win in the courtroom, but to truly restore the faith in his leadership. He needed to show that he had learned, grown, and was now ready to lead with a newfound sense of responsibility. Judge Anderson finally spoke, breaking the silence. Mr. Musk, she said, turning her gaze toward him, you've heard the arguments presented by your counsel. While I appreciate your defense, it is clear that we must still address the severity of the consequences faced by those who trusted in your leadership. This trial is far from over, and while I acknowledge the efforts you've made to correct your mistakes, we must see concrete evidence of those changes, both in the short term and long term. The room held its breath. This was the moment that would determine if Elon's defense had truly begun to make an impact or if the case against him would continue to build. Elon's heart pounded as he prepared for what would come next. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Anderson addressed the court once more. Elon could feel the weight of her gaze as she prepared to make her next ruling. His defense had been presented with force and clarity, but as the judge's words echoed through the room, he knew the battle was far from over. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice unwavering, "I appreciate your counsel's efforts, and I recognize that you've taken steps to remedy the situation. However, the crux of this case remains: can the people who have been affected by your decisions truly trust that you've learned from these mistakes? The reality of what's at stake is not just a financial penalty, but a broader reckoning about leadership. Can you prove, beyond just words and good intentions, that the course of action you now champion will result in real change?" Her words cut through the room like a knife. Elon's stomach tightened as he realized what was at stake. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a battle for his legacy. For all the great things he had accomplished, for all the ways he had changed the world, none of it would matter if he failed in this moment. The outcome of this trial wasn't just about Tesla or SpaceX, it was about whether or not the world could ever truly trust him again. Elon took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of the moment pressing down on him. For years, he had thrived on ambition, on the belief that failure was just another step on the path to success. But this was different. This was personal. This was about his ability to lead, to inspire, to rebuild. Could he rise from this moment and prove that he was more than just a visionary? Could he become the leader people needed him to be? He glanced at his legal team, hoping for a sign of reassurance, but their faces were as grim as his own. Patricia James was busy making notes, her mind already focused on the next phase of the argument. Elon knew that the next step would require more than just legal expertise, it would require something deeper, something more genuine. The room grew quiet as the defense team and the plaintiffs prepared for the next phase of the trial. Elon stood up from his seat and walked toward the stand. The air in the courtroom felt thick as he approached the front. He had been through many challenges in his life, launching rockets into space, trying to revolutionize the automotive industry, and pushing the limits of what technology could achieve. But this was the biggest challenge of his life, standing in front of the world and defending not just his companies, but his integrity. Judge Anderson's eyes remained fixed on him as he took the stand. There was no turning back now. "Mr. Musk," she said, her tone a little softer now, "you've already admitted to your mistakes. But words alone are not enough. You must show me, and this court, that you understand the gravity of your actions and that you are willing to go further than just making promises. We need to see evidence that you are changing, not just in the way you lead your companies, but in how you view your responsibility to the people who trust you." Elon nodded, his voice steady but resolute. "Your Honor, I understand. I can't change the past, but I can prove, through my actions, that I am committed to doing things differently going forward. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can lead with integrity, to fix the mistakes that have been made, and to show that I'm capable of doing better." Judge Anderson's gaze softened for a moment, but her next words hit hard. "I don't just want your words, Mr. Musk. I want actions. I want a plan. I want you to show me how you will rebuild the trust that has been broken, not just with investors, but with your employees, your customers, and the public at large." Elon felt his heart race as he prepared to speak. This was the moment where he had to prove that he wasn't just a tech mogul trying to protect his empire, but a man who had learned from his mistakes and was prepared to take full responsibility. This was his chance to show the world that he was more than just a visionary, he was a leader who could inspire confidence in the future. "I've already taken steps to address the issues at Tesla and SpaceX," Elon said, his voice firm. "First, I've implemented a new structure at both companies that focuses on transparency and accountability. We've introduced regular employee feedback loops, so people at every level of the organization can voice their concerns. We've committed to more regular communication with our investors, and I've personally ensured that the management teams at both companies are more diverse and inclusive, so that we can make better decisions moving forward. He paused for a moment, meeting Judge Anderson's gaze directly. But I know that actions speak louder than words. So, I'm committing today to a set of new initiatives that will rebuild the trust that has been lost. We'll start by implementing an independent oversight committee at both Tesla and SpaceX, made up of industry experts who will review all major decisions and ensure that we are making the right calls. We'll also establish a dedicated ethics board that will review all company practices and ensure that we're meeting the highest standards of responsibility. And finally, I'm committing to a personal accountability plan, where I will take full responsibility for the outcomes of these initiatives. If we fail, I will step down. The courtroom was silent as Elon's words sank in. He had laid it all out, not just as a defense, but as a declaration of his commitment to change. The audience's eyes were on him, waiting, watching, wondering if this was enough to shift the course of the trial. He had put himself on the line, and now, it was up to the court to decide whether it was enough. Judge Anderson's eyes narrowed as she processed Elon's proposal. She wasn't easily swayed, but there was something in his words, a level of sincerity that hadn't been present before. She had heard many apologies, many promises over the years, but there was a rawness to this one that made her pause. Mr. Musk, she said after a long pause, I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility and to commit to real, tangible changes. But the question remains, will these actions be enough to restore trust, not just within your companies, but with the public? We'll need time to evaluate your plans and see how they unfold in practice. The weight of her words hung in the air, but for the first time in the trial, Elon felt a flicker of hope. He had taken the first step toward redemption, and now it was in the hands of the court, and the world, to decide if he could truly rebuild what had been broken. The next few days felt like a blur to Elon. The whirlwind of legal battles, media scrutiny, and internal shifts within Tesla and SpaceX was overwhelming. The courtroom was just one stage of the larger battle, the real war was unfolding in the public eye. As the trial continued, Elon realized that the commitment he had made to Judge Anderson was only the beginning. He had promised to rebuild trust, but the world was watching, waiting for proof. The first wave hit when the press conference was scheduled. A carefully planned event by his PR team to outline the changes Elon had promised. It was supposed to be a turning point, a chance to show the world that he was taking action. Instead, it turned into a battleground for public opinion. The moment Elon stepped onto the stage, the cameras flashed, and reporters jostled for a better position. The air was thick with questions. His PR team had prepped him for this, but no amount of preparation could have braced him for the ferocity of the media's assault. Mr. Musk, one reporter shouted, you've promised accountability, but can you explain why it took this trial for you to make these changes? Are you only acting now because your back is against the wall? Elon felt his throat tighten as the question hit him like a punch. His legal team had warned him that the media would capitalize on his mistakes, but the intensity of it was overwhelming. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice steady but not without a hint of frustration. Look, he said, I'm not here to offer excuses. I've made mistakes. I should have been more transparent and proactive earlier. But I am committed to making things right, and that means implementing real changes. This isn't about the trial or saving face, it's about ensuring that my companies can continue to push the boundaries of innovation in a responsible way. Another reporter jumped in, but Mr. Musk, can you truly change? Tesla and SpaceX are built on your vision. If you step down from day-to-day operations, won't that threaten the company's futures? Elon felt the heat of the room press in on him. The question was legitimate, he was the driving force behind these companies. But now, he had committed to a level of transparency and responsibility that would shift the dynamics of his leadership. Was it enough? Could he step back from the micromanagement he was famous for and allow the new systems he'd promised to take hold? I'm not stepping away from my role, he responded, but I am allowing the structures we've put in place to work. I'm confident that the changes we've made will allow the companies to thrive without relying solely on my direct involvement. We need to build something that lasts beyond me." The questions didn't stop. It seemed like every reporter in the room was trying to expose a flaw, to poke holes in the fragile shield he had built. Elon tried to remain calm, but inside, he felt the pressure building. After the conference, the media frenzy exploded across social platforms. Opinions were divided. Some hailed him for owning up to his mistakes and committing to meaningful change. Others were far more critical, questioning whether his words were just another round of empty promises. On Twitter, the hashtags #MuskAccountability and #MuskLied trended simultaneously. Comment sections were filled with heated debates, from staunch defenders praising his transparency, to detractors accusing him of only acting because of the lawsuit and public backlash. "I think Musk is trying, but it's too little too late," one user posted. "People don't trust him anymore." Another user replied, "He built Tesla and SpaceX into what they are today. He deserves a chance to fix things." The social media storm seemed endless, and Elon found himself checking his phone less and less. He knew that responding to every criticism would only drag him deeper into the mire. Instead, he focused on the work, the meetings with his executive teams, the strategy sessions to implement the reforms, and the deep conversations with those he trusted most. Despite his efforts, the storm outside raged on. News outlets dug into his past, rehashing old controversies. They scrutinized his leadership style, his overpromises, and underdeliveries. They painted him as reckless, egotistical, and at times, impulsive. But what stung most was not the articles or the critics, it was the whispers in the hallways of his own companies. Elon had always surrounded himself with brilliant minds who believed in his vision, but now, there was an undercurrent of doubt that was hard to ignore. In a private meeting with Tesla's executive team, Elon could sense the shift. Conversations that once flowed with excitement and possibility now felt more cautious, more hesitant. The skepticism in the room was palpable, even from those who had been with him from the beginning. "Mr. Musk," one of the senior engineers, Rachel, said softly, "We've heard your promises, and we're ready to make these changes work. But it's not just about what you say. It's about the actions that follow. The entire company is watching to see how you handle this. People need to see that it's not just about saving the brand, but about fixing the culture you've created." Rachel's words hit Elon hard. She wasn't wrong. The success of Tesla, and even SpaceX, had always been tied to the intensity and drive he brought to the table. But that same intensity had created a high-pressure, high-stakes environment, one that was now beginning to crack under the weight of his own mistakes. "Thank you, Rachel," Elon said, his voice quieter than usual. "I know that trust has been broken. And I know that I have to show not just my words, but my actions, that we're changing. We're going to get through this. But I need all of you to stick with me." Rachel nodded, but there was a lingering uncertainty in her eyes. It wasn't enough to simply offer words anymore. Elon realized that to truly move forward, he needed to become the leader his companies needed, not the visionary who expected others to simply follow his lead, but the leader who would work alongside them to rebuild. The following weeks were a blur of difficult conversations and long hours. Elon worked tirelessly with the ethics boards, the new oversight committees, and the employee feedback channels he had promised. He continued to push himself, now more acutely aware than ever of the damage that had been done, not just to his companies, but to the trust of everyone who had once believed in him. As the court trial loomed closer, Elon had to ask himself the most difficult question: was it enough? Could he truly rebuild his empire, not just in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of the people who had stood by him through thick and thin? One thing was certain, the road ahead was still uncertain, but Elon Musk was no stranger to uncertainty. He had always thrived in it. But this time, it wasn't just about technology or innovation. It was about his legacy, and whether he could rise from the ashes and prove that even a man who had lost everything could learn from his mistakes and rebuild. The months after Elon Musk's public statements and promises of reform passed in a blur of relentless meetings, strategy sessions, and countless hours spent reassuring both his employees and the media. The trial continued, but its focus shifted as new, more personal challenges emerged. It became increasingly clear that the price of redemption wasn't just about external efforts, it was about what Elon had to sacrifice personally to restore the faith of his companies and the public. Inside Tesla's headquarters, Elon's once highly energetic presence had shifted. The constant pressure from the media and public scrutiny weighed on him like an anchor. His mornings began early, but now, they started with a long moment of contemplation in the quiet of his office before diving into the day's tasks. No longer did he feel the same adrenaline rush when walking through the doors of the office. The success that had once seemed so inevitable now felt fraught with doubt. One afternoon, as Elon was meeting with Tesla's senior leadership team, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The conversations were still productive, the goals still lofty, but the spark that had driven Tesla's meteoric rise was no longer there. They were all trying, but the fear of failure and uncertainty seemed to linger. Patricia James, the attorney who had been by his side throughout the trial, noticed the change immediately. As one of the few people Elon trusted completely, she pulled him aside after the meeting, her voice lowering with concern. "Elon, I can see the toll this is taking on you," Patricia said, her eyes steady but warm. "You've made promises, and you're working hard to fulfill them, but you're burning out. You can't keep up this pace forever. And I don't think anyone expects you to." Elon was quiet for a moment, his hands resting on the conference table. "I know, Patricia. But if I stop, even for a second, it feels like I'm admitting defeat. I'm trying to prove to everyone, to myself, that I can still do this. But, sometimes I don't even know if it's enough." Patricia watched him closely. She had been by his side long enough to know that Elon had never been one to back down, no matter how difficult things got. But this was different. The weight of the trial, the scrutiny, the internal challenges, it was starting to erode his confidence. "You don't have to do this alone, Elon," Patricia said, her voice firm. "You've surrounded yourself with brilliant people, people who can help carry the load. Let them. Allow yourself to lean on them. You don't need to prove everything by yourself." Elon gave her a small, weary smile. "I appreciate that, Patricia. But I've never been the type to delegate the most important parts. I've always been the one driving the vision forward. Maybe it's time to let others take the reins for a while," she said gently. "Maybe this trial is showing you that leadership isn't about doing everything yourself, it's about knowing when to ask for help, and trusting those around you to step up." Her words lingered with him long after the meeting ended. It was a truth he had ignored for so long. For years, he had thrived on his own ability to push boundaries and force innovation, often at the expense of balance and trust in others. He had been so focused on being the visionary that he neglected the power of collaboration and support. Back at SpaceX, similar sentiments echoed in conversations with his trusted engineers. SpaceX had been Elon's passion project for over 2 decades. There, too, the culture of intense work and innovation was now being tested. He had always been a hands-on leader, but the company was beginning to feel the strain. People weren't just physically exhausted, they were mentally and emotionally drained as well. As Elon sat in his office at SpaceX one evening, staring out over the launch pads in the distance, he reflected on the years he'd spent building these companies. He had always been driven by the idea of changing the world, of pushing technology to its absolute limits. But the road to success had come at a steep cost. Was it worth it? Was the relentless pursuit of greatness worth the toll it took on him and the people closest to him? A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Rachel, one of his senior engineers from SpaceX, who had worked closely with him on numerous projects over the years. She stepped inside, offering a tentative smile. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course," Elon replied, gesturing for her to sit down. "I've been thinking a lot about the changes you're making," Rachel began. "And I know it's not easy for you. I can see how much pressure you're under, and I want you to know that we're all here to support you." Elon looked at her, his face softening. "I appreciate that, Rachel. But you know I've always been the one pushing everyone forward. I've never really let go, not even when things were tough. And now, everything feels so fragile. I don't know if I can trust that these changes will stick." Rachel leaned forward, her voice steady and full of conviction. "Elon, you've already done the hard part. You've made the decision to change. But change isn't just about the actions you take. It's about the environment you create. The trust you build with us. You don't have to carry everything on your shoulders. We're all in this together, and we're ready to step up. Just let us." For the first time in weeks, Elon felt a flicker of something new, hope. It wasn't the hope that came from grand ideas or flashy innovations, it was the hope that came from knowing that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his own. His team, his people, were there. They believed in the vision, and they believed in him, perhaps even more than he believed in himself at that moment. Later that night, as Elon lay in bed, he thought back to Judge Anderson's words. "Show me how you will rebuild the trust." He had been so focused on making the right decisions for the companies, on impressing the judge, on winning the court of public opinion. But the real challenge, the one that mattered most, was rebuilding the trust within himself, within his team. That was the price of redemption. It wasn't just about making promises and delivering on them. It was about learning to rely on others, to trust that a leader is only as strong as the people who follow. And as the dawn broke, Elon knew the road to redemption was still long. But this time, he wasn't walking it alone. Elon Musk stood at the podium, facing a crowded room of journalists, employees, and executives. The noise from the bustling press conference was deafening, yet in his mind, everything felt strangely quiet. This moment had been coming for weeks, ever since he began his personal and professional transformation, and it was now finally here. The next move would either affirm his growth or undo the work he had put in since the trial began. For the past several months, he had committed himself to the promises he had made, both in the courtroom and in private. Changes had been implemented across Tesla and SpaceX, new systems of accountability had been set in place, and his role in day-to-day operations had shifted to allow for more collaborative leadership. It had been grueling, both for him and for his teams, but they were moving forward. Slowly, but surely, the effects were showing. Today's press conference, however, wasn't about just another round of promises, it was about making his biggest move yet. A move that, if successful, would silence the critics and prove that Elon Musk could not only lead but also adapt and grow. He was about to announce a major shift in leadership, one that would define his legacy for years to come. The press corps was buzzing with anticipation. Elon glanced briefly at his PR team standing off to the side. They had been working for days to craft the perfect announcement, but this was his moment, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of it. He adjusted his tie and stepped forward, projecting calm confidence despite the storm inside. The room quieted almost immediately. "Thank you all for coming today," Elon began, his voice steady. "I stand before you, not as the same person I was when I first walked into this room a year ago. I've made mistakes, and I've learned a great deal in the process." He paused, letting his words sink in. The silence was thick, and he could sense the skepticism in the room. "But it's not just about recognizing my mistakes. It's about how we move forward, together. Tesla and SpaceX were built on bold visions, but visions are only worth pursuing if we have the right people, the right leadership in place to bring them to life." Elon's hands moved with purpose as he continued. "I've spent a lot of time reflecting on my role at both companies and what's best for the future. Today, I'm announcing that I will be stepping down from my position as CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. Instead, we'll be forming new leadership structures, with strong, capable individuals taking the helm at both companies. There was an audible gasp from the room. Elon could feel the shock ripple through the crowd. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, and, in many ways, the moment they had doubted would ever come. I'm still deeply committed to these companies, and I will remain involved in the long-term strategy and innovation, Elon continued. But I've come to realize that the true measure of leadership isn't how much you can do on your own, it's how much you can empower others to take ownership and lead. The change we need is not just in the structure but in how we work together, with transparency, accountability, and trust. A murmur of disbelief ran through the room. This was unprecedented. Elon Musk, the visionary behind two of the most groundbreaking companies in the world, was stepping back from the CEO position. It was a bold move, a moment of personal growth, but also one that carried immense risk. If it didn't go well, if the new leadership faltered or struggled, it could undo everything he had built. But Elon was at peace with his decision. He had put in place systems to ensure that Tesla and SpaceX would not only survive but thrive without his constant involvement. Now, it was time for the world to see if they could succeed in his absence. As the conference continued, the questions came fast and furious. Reporters were stunned, some skeptical, others hopeful. They questioned his motivations. Was this a result of the trial? Was it an attempt to shift blame? Was he leaving because of the pressure? But Elon answered them all with the same calm resolve. He wasn't running away, he was taking the first step toward building something bigger than himself. Later that day, the news exploded across the globe. Headlines read, "Elon Musk steps down as CEO of Tesla and SpaceX." The news was met with shock and excitement, and across social media, the reactions were varied. Some praised Elon for his self-awareness and growth, while others wondered if this was the beginning of the end for the companies. But as the dust began to settle, one thing became clear: this was the turning point. Elon had taken the leap. Now, the world would watch to see if his companies could rise to the challenge. In the days following the announcement, Elon met with the newly appointed CEOs of Tesla and SpaceX, leaders he had carefully chosen over the past several months. Both had proven themselves time and again, and Elon trusted them with the future of the companies he had built. Together, they would take Tesla and SpaceX into their next phases, with Elon as their guide, but not their constant presence. The first test came almost immediately. A massive SpaceX launch was scheduled, one that had been months in the making. Elon had been intimately involved in the planning and development, but this time, he would be on the sidelines, watching as the new leadership team took charge. Elon stood on the launch pad, watching the rocket rise into the sky. His heart pounded in his chest, not with the usual exhilaration, but with a different emotion, pride. It wasn't his hands that had put the rocket together, it wasn't his decisions that had gotten them to this point, it was the work of an entire team, of people he had trusted to lead. As the rocket ascended into the heavens, Elon felt a shift deep inside. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The first real test of the new leadership, of the system he had created. The launch was flawless. Back in the office, things were different, too. Tesla's new CEO, Karen Lee, who had been with the company for over a decade, was now running the show. Karen had always been an advocate for more collaborative leadership, and now, she was putting those principles into action. Elon had given her the space to take charge, and it was paying off. Tesla's growth was accelerating, and their new vision for sustainable energy was moving forward faster than anyone had anticipated. As for Elon, he continued to stay involved, but not as the hands-on, micromanaging figure he once was. He attended meetings, offered guidance, and occasionally stepped in for the most critical decisions, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one doing it all. It was a strange feeling, one that came with a sense of liberation. The pressure was still there, but it was now shared by a team of people who believed in the vision just as much as he did. The turning point had come, not just in his companies, but in his life. Elon Musk was no longer the sole driving force behind Tesla and SpaceX. He had done what he never thought possible, he had let go. He had learned the value of trust, of letting others lead, of knowing when to step aside and let the future take its own course. He had stepped back, and for the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. Elon Musk had always been a visionary, a man driven by a desire to change the world. He had reached heights few ever dreamed of, from launching reusable rockets to revolutionizing the automotive industry. But as the months passed since his decision to step down as CEO, a new test emerged, one far more personal and far more dangerous than any business challenge he had ever faced. Tesla and SpaceX were thriving. His successors at both companies were doing well, and the employees seemed motivated and focused on pushing forward with the goals they had set. Everything appeared to be running smoothly on the surface. But underneath, a storm was brewing. It began with a routine meeting at SpaceX. Elon was there to discuss the progress of a new space mission, a mission that was designed to push the boundaries of human exploration. It was a critical moment for SpaceX, one that could secure their place in the history of space travel. However, as the meeting progressed, a series of disturbing issues surfaced, unforeseen engineering challenges that would delay the mission by months. The technology behind the mission was not as ready as everyone had hoped. Internal leaks had been surfacing within SpaceX, whispering about dissatisfaction among the ranks. Elon's decision to step back had created an unexpected void in leadership, one that not even the most capable new executives could easily fill. The worst part was the news that SpaceX's flagship rocket, the one designed to carry astronauts to Mars, had suffered a critical design flaw. It wasn't enough to halt the mission completely, but it could cause irreparable damage to the company's reputation if it was exposed to the public. Elon knew that in order to maintain the trust of both the public and the SpaceX team, he would have to act fast, and decisively. He couldn't hide behind the new leadership. This was his company, his creation, and it was under threat. More than just business, this was personal. He sat in his office late that night, the lights of the SpaceX campus twinkling outside his window, reflecting his uncertainty. He had gotten used to the pressure, but this felt different. This felt like everything he had worked for was on the edge of collapse. He couldn't let it all fall apart now, not when he had already come so far in his personal journey of redemption. The decision weighed on him heavily. If he chose to step in and take control again, it could destroy everything he had worked so hard to build, everything he had promised to change. But if he did nothing, the company would spiral into chaos, possibly threatening the future of human space exploration. He had always been the type to fight through adversity, to charge forward with unyielding confidence. But this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about the people at SpaceX and Tesla, the ones who had believed in him. They had trusted him to lead them into the future, but now, he was faced with a stark choice: should he pull the trigger and take back the reins, or should he stand by his promise to give others the opportunity to lead? For hours, Elon paced back and forth, his mind racing through the possibilities. He thought about the lessons he had learned in the past year, about trust, delegation, and the importance of letting go. It wasn't just about solving problems, it was about creating a culture where people could solve problems on their own. The next morning, he called a meeting with Patricia James, his trusted legal advisor, and Karen Lee, Tesla's new CEO. The meeting was not what either of them expected. When they walked into Elon's office, they found him looking tense, more serious than they had ever seen him before. "I'm facing a dilemma," Elon started, his voice low. "SpaceX is in trouble. A major mission could fail. There's a design flaw in our flagship rocket. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. If I step back in and take control, I could save this mission, but it could also undo everything I've worked to change. If I leave it to the team, they may not have the experience or the authority to make the right decisions quickly enough." Patricia and Karen exchanged a glance. They both knew this moment would come, but they didn't realize how soon it would be. "Elon," Patricia said carefully, "you've made a commitment to step back for a reason. You've worked hard to build a culture of leadership where others can step up. If you take control now, it could undo everything you've worked for. But if you don't act, it could destroy the very foundation of the company. Karen nodded, adding, "You've built a team, Elon. They believe in your vision. It's their time to lead. But they need you to trust them. Trust that they can solve this." Elon sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The weight of the decision felt like it was crushing him. He had been used to being the one who took charge, the one who was always there to make the hard calls. Could he really let go when everything was on the line? "I don't know if I can," Elon admitted quietly. "This is SpaceX we're talking about, the future of humanity. If I make the wrong choice, it's not just about business. It's about the people who are counting on us to push the boundaries of space." Patricia's eyes softened. "Elon, sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go. But you've already shown your team what's possible. You've built this company. Now it's time to trust them to carry it forward. Trust that they'll find the solutions." The room fell silent as Elon thought over their words. He had been so focused on what he had to lose, his legacy, his vision, that he had forgotten something essential. It wasn't just about him. It never had been. Elon stood up, his mind made up. "I'm going to trust them," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "I'm going to trust that the people I've surrounded myself with can solve this problem. It's their time." As the meeting ended, Elon felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't about fighting to hold on to power or control, it was about fighting for the future, and letting others take the lead when the time came. That evening, he sent an email to SpaceX's leadership team, detailing the problem and offering his full support while making it clear that he would not be taking over. He had faith in them, and he would not let fear dictate his actions. The next few days were a blur of emails, calls, and tense conversations. The SpaceX team worked around the clock, recalculating, redesigning, and troubleshooting the rocket's issues. It wasn't easy, but the team pulled together in ways they hadn't before. The pressure was on, but they knew they could rise to the challenge. Finally, the day came. The test flight of the rocket would take place in just hours. Elon stood at a distance, watching as his team prepared for launch. His hands trembled slightly, but his heart was at peace. The rocket soared into the sky, flawless and perfect. It was a success. Elon exhaled deeply. This was the moment he had been waiting for. His faith in his team had paid off. And with that, he realized something profound: letting go was the greatest act of leadership he could have made. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the rocket soared high above the Earth, Elon Musk stood at the control center, eyes fixed on the screen. His heart was still racing, even though the mission had been a success. It wasn't just the success of the rocket launch that kept him on edge, it was the deeper realization that the decision he made, trusting his team and stepping back, was beginning to prove itself. This moment of triumph wasn't just about a successful mission, it was about something far more important, his transformation. But this moment of peace was fleeting. No sooner had the rocket disappeared into the skies than the weight of the next challenge bore down on him. A phone call interrupted his thoughts. It was from Patricia James, his trusted legal advisor. Her tone was serious, the kind of tone that always seemed to precede bad news. "Elon," Patricia began, "we've got a situation. A whistleblower from inside Tesla has come forward with serious allegations. They're claiming that some of the changes you implemented in the company have led to unsafe practices in production. There are rumors of faulty components and cover-ups." Elon's stomach dropped. The moment he had feared was finally here, his past actions were coming back to haunt him. All the work he had done to step back, to trust others, was being questioned. And this wasn't just a minor complaint, it had the potential to undo everything he had worked for. "I'll be there," he said, his voice more calm than he felt. He ended the call and made his way to Tesla's headquarters, the familiar hum of his electric car a poor comfort against the storm brewing in his mind. When he arrived at Tesla, the atmosphere was tense. Employees whispered in the hallways, the press was gathering outside, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Patricia and Karen were already in a conference room, waiting for him. The whistleblower, Karen said, her expression grim, has already contacted multiple media outlets. This could escalate quickly if we don't handle it right. Elon took a deep breath and sat down, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders once more. He had to act, but he couldn't afford to make the wrong move. Do we know how credible these allegations are? Elon asked, trying to maintain control of the situation. Patricia handed him a folder filled with documents, including emails, internal memos, and photos of components that had allegedly been mishandled. The evidence was damning. The claims of defective parts were backed up by photos showing cracks in key materials used in the car's batteries. The cover-ups, if true, were a direct violation of Tesla's commitment to safety and transparency. This is bad, Elon, Patricia said, her voice low. If these accusations get picked up by the media, it could trigger an investigation. And if the products are found to be unsafe, you're looking at recalls and potentially serious legal repercussions. Elon rubbed his temples. The companies were so close to being on stable ground again, yet this was the kind of nightmare scenario he feared would emerge as a result of his decision to step away. The people at Tesla were still operating in his shadow. He had trusted them to handle these things, but the cracks in the system were starting to show. How could this have happened? I never wanted to turn a blind eye, Elon muttered, his voice tinged with regret. I was too focused on handing things over. I trusted them to do their jobs, but now look where we are. Karen placed a hand on his shoulder. It's not about blame, Elon. It's about how we respond. We can't go back, but we can move forward. Elon knew she was right. This was no longer about pointing fingers, it was about damage control. The question now was how to fix the situation before it spiraled completely out of control. They quickly called a meeting with Tesla's board members. Elon needed to address the issue head-on. His confidence had taken a hit, but he knew that a calm, decisive response was the only way forward. As the board gathered around the table, Elon stood at the front, ready to speak. I want to be clear, he began, Tesla has always prided itself on its commitment to quality and safety. These allegations, if true, are unacceptable. We need to investigate this matter fully and transparently. We will not hide from our mistakes, and we will do whatever it takes to make things right. The room was silent. Elon could feel the weight of their stares, a mix of concern and expectation. They had trusted him, and now, they were looking to him for leadership in this moment of crisis. I'm taking full responsibility for this, Elon continued, and I'm calling for an immediate internal investigation. We will bring in third-party auditors to ensure that everything is up to standard. And if any of these claims prove to be true, we will do whatever is necessary to correct it, no matter the cost. The board nodded, and for the first time in a while, Elon felt the familiar spark of determination within himself. He had made mistakes, yes, but that wasn't the end of the road. It was just another challenge, another opportunity to prove that he could learn, adapt, and overcome. Over the next few weeks, Tesla underwent a full internal audit, scrutinizing every corner of their production processes. They reviewed the claims made by the whistleblower, double-checked their supply chain, and tested every aspect of their car's components. The investigation was grueling, and the media didn't make it any easier. Headlines flashed across screens, and the public began to doubt Tesla's commitment to safety. Elon's reputation, which had just started to recover, was once again under fire. But in the midst of this storm, something incredible happened. The Tesla team rallied together. Engineers, designers, and workers across all levels of the company put in long hours to ensure that their products met the highest standards. New safety protocols were implemented, and outdated systems were replaced with better, more transparent practices. Elon's faith in his team was slowly being validated. Finally, after weeks of scrutiny, the results of the investigation were revealed. The allegations were, in fact, true. There had been lapses in the quality control processes, and some defective parts had made it into production. But Tesla had already corrected the issues, and no vehicles had been shipped to customers with those faulty components. A full recall was not necessary, but the company would be offering free replacements for any customers affected. The public was quick to react. Some were critical, but many appreciated Tesla's transparency and willingness to take immediate action. The company had faced the reckoning head-on and emerged stronger for it. Elon sat in his office the day after the announcement, reflecting on what had transpired. The lesson was clear: even when you've made progress, the road to redemption isn't always smooth. But it was in these moments, in the face of adversity, that true leadership was forged. The next test would surely come. But for now, Elon Musk was not only the founder of two world-changing companies, he was a man who had learned to lead with humility and grace. And that was a victory all on its own. Elon Musk had always prided himself on his resilience. He was a man who thrived on pressure, a visionary who could think years ahead of everyone else, and a leader who never backed down from a challenge. But the aftermath of the Tesla crisis had taken its toll in ways he hadn't anticipated. The long hours, the scrutiny, and the weight of responsibility were wearing him down. As weeks passed since the whistleblower scandal, the emotional and mental toll on Elon became evident. Despite the resolution of the issue and the positive press surrounding Tesla's response, Elon found himself more isolated than ever. He no longer had the same energy he once had when diving into new ventures or launching new projects. His focus had shifted, and it seemed like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. The press still praised him for handling the Tesla crisis with grace and transparency, but those closest to him knew the truth: Elon was beginning to feel disconnected from the companies he had founded. The victories, the accomplishments, the relentless push for innovation, none of it seemed to matter as much anymore. Karen Lee, Tesla's CEO, and Patricia James, his legal advisor, noticed the change in him. They could see the toll it was taking on him. It wasn't just the stress of running multi-billion-dollar companies, it was something deeper. They had both known Elon long enough to see that he was struggling with something more personal, something beyond the day-to-day operations of his businesses. One evening, Karen invited Elon out for dinner. She knew he needed a break from the office, away from the constant stream of emails and phone calls that consumed his days. As they sat down at a quiet restaurant, Karen looked at him carefully, her concern written all over her face. "Elon, you've been through a lot lately," she began. "The whistleblower incident, the fallout with the media, it's not easy. I know you're pushing yourself to stay on top of everything, but you're only human. You need to take a step back and recharge. You can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders forever." Elon smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've always been the one to handle everything. I'm the one people look to when things go wrong. I can't afford to let my guard down. Not now." Karen leaned forward, her voice softer now. "But that's just it, Elon. You don't have to carry it all. You've built something incredible with Tesla and SpaceX. It's not about proving you can do everything yourself. It's about trusting the people around you. You've done it before. You need to let others carry the load." Elon looked down at his hands, his mind swirling with thoughts. He had spent so many years chasing the impossible, trying to change the world. But at what cost? His relationships had suffered. His personal life was a distant memory. And now, even his own peace of mind was slipping through his fingers. Was this truly what he wanted? Was this the price of greatness? "I don't know if I can stop," Elon muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. "If I step away, what happens? What if everything falls apart? I've spent my whole life making sure this doesn't happen. What if it's all for nothing?" Karen reached across the table and placed a hand on his. It's not for nothing, Elon. But you have to ask yourself if it's worth losing everything else in the process. You've changed the world, and now it's time for you to take care of yourself. The world won't stop spinning if you take a break. Your companies won't fall apart if you trust them. Elon let out a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew Karen was right, but the thought of letting go, of stepping back entirely, terrified him. He had built Tesla and SpaceX from the ground up, and every decision, every moment, had been his. What would it mean to stop? Would it mean that all his work would crumble? Maybe you're right, Elon said, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers. Maybe I do need to step back. But I don't know how. It's all I've ever known. The grind. The pressure. The challenge. I'm not sure who I am without it. Karen nodded slowly. It's not about giving up, Elon. It's about finding balance. You can still be a part of Tesla and SpaceX. You can still lead them, but you don't have to do it all on your own. You don't have to lose yourself in the process. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, with Elon lost in thought. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that his relentless drive for success had come at a cost. It was easy to get caught up in the pursuit of innovation, to push yourself and everyone around you to the limit. But there had to be more to life than just work. The next few days were difficult. Elon spent time reflecting on what he truly wanted. The weight of his decisions, of his past actions, was heavy. It was hard to let go of the identity he had created for himself, the unstoppable entrepreneur who was always at the center of the action. But as he looked at the people around him, Karen, Patricia, and the other leaders at Tesla and SpaceX, he began to see that perhaps he could make a difference in a new way. The breakthrough didn't come all at once, but over time, Elon realized that he didn't have to be the one to do everything. In fact, stepping back might be the key to his long-term success. It was time to trust others, to delegate more, and to focus on the things that truly mattered, his health, his relationships, and his own happiness. He wasn't ready to walk away completely from his companies, not yet. But he was ready to take a step back, to stop carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. There were other leaders in his companies who were capable of driving them forward. His job now was to empower them to do just that. It wasn't an easy decision, and there were still moments of doubt. But as he made his way through the weeks ahead, Elon found himself rediscovering the joy that had first driven him to pursue his dreams. It wasn't about perfection or control, it was about making a lasting impact and knowing when to let go. Elon Musk had always believed in changing the world, but now, he was starting to realize that the world wasn't the only thing that needed changing. He did, too. Elon Musk had always been a man defined by ambition, a person who thought beyond the ordinary, whose mind constantly buzzed with plans, ideas, and futuristic concepts. Yet, after his recent breakthrough, realizing the importance of stepping back and finding balance, he began to feel the subtle but undeniable pull of a different kind of power. The power of being present, of letting go of the relentless grind he had spent decades cultivating. But life, it seemed, was about to throw yet another curveball at him. The first test came sooner than expected. As much as Elon tried to embrace his newfound perspective, his role at Tesla and SpaceX demanded attention. His position in the public eye and his responsibility to his team still loomed large. Each day, new challenges emerged, each one pulling him back into the cycle of relentless decision-making and high-stakes drama. While his employees had stepped up in many ways, the truth was, Tesla and SpaceX were still his companies. They bore his imprint, and everything that happened, good or bad, reflected on him. The pressure never truly went away. And now, there was a new complication, the looming competition. Rivals in the electric vehicle and aerospace sectors were starting to catch up with Elon's companies. With each new breakthrough in technology and each new launch, the world of space exploration and electric cars was becoming more crowded. But none of these competitors had the history or the vision of SpaceX or Tesla. None of them had Elon Musk. Still, the competition had sharpened, and the world was starting to question whether Elon could still lead from the top, whether he could maintain his place as the unchallenged genius of Silicon Valley. As Elon sat at his desk one morning, the weight of the world felt heavier than ever. It was clear, he couldn't truly escape the demands of his leadership. The momentary pause, the balance he had sought, it felt fleeting, a dream that was slipping from his grasp. Elon's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Karen Lee, Tesla's CEO. The text was short and to the point, "We need to talk. Big decision coming up. Conference call in 30 minutes." A sense of foreboding washed over him. He was about to be pulled back into the whirlwind. As he joined the video call with Karen, Patricia, and the heads of several departments, the gravity of the situation was immediately apparent. "Elon," Karen started, "we've been hit with a new challenge. Our top competitor, Rivian, just announced a partnership with a major tech giant, Apple. They're rolling out an electric vehicle that could threaten our market share in a way we haven't seen before. We need to act fast." Elon felt a familiar rush. The kind of rush he had known his entire life. The pressure, the stakes, the tension, it was all coming back to him. For a brief moment, he considered stepping back from the conversation, to let the team handle it. But that instinct to lead, to be in the center of the action, overpowered his desire for balance. "What's our strategy?" Elon asked, his voice calm, but his mind racing with possible responses. "We need to launch something even more groundbreaking," Patricia said. "But we can't just focus on the car itself. We need a comprehensive, innovative strategy, something that pushes boundaries. We've been hearing whispers about the concept of autonomous electric air taxis, and we need to explore that. If we can secure a foothold in this market before Rivian or anyone else does, we could take back the initiative." Elon leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. The idea of autonomous air taxis wasn't new to him. He had dreamed of flying cars for years, but the technology wasn't quite there. Still, if anyone could push the boundaries, it was Tesla. "I want a prototype ready within the next 6 months," Elon declared, surprising everyone. "This is the kind of radical leap we need. I don't want to hear any excuses about challenges or limitations. We do it, or we don't do it at all." As the call ended and his team got to work, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that he had just committed himself to a path he wasn't sure he was ready for. The drive to compete, to stay ahead, was a force far stronger than any sense of balance he had briefly tried to embrace. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and sleepless nights. The team at Tesla and SpaceX poured all their energy into the autonomous air taxi project. It was an ambitious plan, and the clock was ticking. Rivian's electric vehicle was already generating buzz, and the pressure to respond was mounting. Elon, once again, found himself entrenched in the daily grind. The promise he had made to himself about finding balance seemed like a distant memory. The need to outdo his competition, to push further and harder, was overwhelming. And yet, every night when he finally collapsed into bed, he couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he was losing something vital. His mental and physical health were deteriorating. He couldn't sleep for more than a few hours, his mind constantly churning with ideas, solutions, and risks. It wasn't long before he noticed the strain it was putting on his relationships. Karen, Patricia, and others who had been his allies began to notice the change. His temper flared more easily, his patience wore thin, and his ability to delegate effectively started to suffer. Elon knew what was happening, but he couldn't stop it. He had to keep pushing, keep innovating, keep leading. One night, after another grueling meeting, Karen stopped him in the hallway outside his office. Her expression was unreadable, but her concern was unmistakable. "Elon," she said, "you're not yourself anymore. You're running on fumes. I know you're under pressure, but you're pushing too hard. You're starting to hurt the team, and yourself." Elon paused, looking at her with exhaustion in his eyes. "I know. I can feel it. But I can't stop. Not now. The stakes are too high. Tesla, SpaceX, they can't afford to fall behind. And neither can I. Karen shook her head. You need to take a step back. Again. If you burn out now, all of this, everything you've worked for, could come crashing down. You have to decide if the price of power is worth losing everything else. Elon stared at her, silent for a long moment. Her words hit harder than he expected. The truth was, he had been afraid of this moment. Afraid of realizing that the relentless pursuit of success was never going to bring him the peace he sought. He had built an empire, but at what cost? I don't know if I can stop, he whispered. Karen put a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to stop, Elon. Just, let go a little. Give the team more space. Trust them more. You've always said that innovation thrives on freedom. Maybe it's time to let that freedom apply to you, too. Elon stood there, torn between the two forces pulling him in different directions. Could he keep going down this path, sacrificing his health and his relationships for the sake of victory? Or was there a different way, a way that allowed him to lead without losing everything else? He didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was clear, the price of power might be too high. Elon Musk's world had always been built on extremes. He lived at the intersection of genius and madness, pushing boundaries that most people wouldn't even consider. But there was a price to everything. The months of constant pressure, the sleepless nights, and the ever-present stress had taken a toll that even Elon couldn't ignore anymore. It all came to a head one morning when he woke up, drenched in sweat, his head pounding, and his heart racing as if he'd just run a marathon in his sleep. For the past few weeks, he'd been barely sleeping, working long hours with little rest. His anxiety had been climbing steadily, and now it felt as though his body had finally reached its limit. The mental fog that had clouded his thoughts had become more pronounced, and his body, once resilient, was beginning to protest. Elon lay still for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. The constant pressure from the media, the looming competition, and the insatiable demands of Tesla and SpaceX, it had all built to this point. The toll wasn't just physical, it was emotional and psychological as well. He thought about the words Karen had said to him. You have to decide if the price of power is worth losing everything else. In that moment it was impossible to ignore the truth any longer, something had to change. Elon didn't want to admit it, but he was burned out. Deep down, he knew that if he didn't take a step back now, he might lose everything. Not just his companies, but the relationships that meant the most to him, the very things that gave him a sense of purpose beyond his work. But taking a step back felt impossible. How could he? He had built these companies from the ground up. Every decision, every success, and every failure had his name on it. How could he ever let go? Still, the decision was looming. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to acknowledge his vulnerability. He wasn't invincible. He couldn't keep running at full speed forever. Something had to give, and he needed to figure out what that would be. The phone call came later that morning, a scheduled meeting with the heads of Tesla and SpaceX. Elon could hear the urgency in their voices as they discussed the upcoming launch plans for their new electric vehicle and the progress on the autonomous air taxi project. But despite the fire in their words, Elon could barely focus. His thoughts were all over the place, his mind in a fog. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion. It was the emotional drain, the mental strain of carrying the weight of these companies alone. The expectation from the world was suffocating. The competition was fierce, and his own team depended on him. But how could he keep being the visionary, the leader they all looked to, when he was on the brink of collapse? Elon, are you with us? Karen's voice broke through his thoughts. He looked at the screen, meeting her gaze, and felt a deep pang of guilt. She knew something was off. She'd always known when he was pushing too hard, and she wasn't about to let him hide it now. Yeah, Elon replied, his voice hoarse, though he didn't remember speaking. "I'm here." The conversation continued, but Elon felt like an outsider in his own meeting. The discussion around the air taxi project, the new features they were rolling out for Tesla's cars, the upcoming market analysis, everything felt distant, like it was happening in another world. The pressure was suffocating, and he could barely find the energy to keep up. At the end of the call, Karen paused before ending the meeting. "Elon," she said gently, "we need to talk. Not about business. About you." Elon's heart sank. He knew exactly where this was going. The weight of her words felt heavier than anything else. "I don't think you're okay," she said softly. "And I think you know that, too. It's not just the work. It's more than that. You've been carrying so much for so long, and it's starting to break you. And you don't have to do this alone." Elon didn't respond right away. What could he say? He had built a life on the idea of doing it all himself. He was the one everyone depended on. He had built Tesla and SpaceX from the ground up, and now people were telling him it was too much. That he wasn't enough. "I don't know how to stop," Elon whispered, his voice barely audible. "Everything I've worked for, it's all riding on me. What happens if I step back? What happens if I let go?" Karen let out a quiet sigh. "It's not about letting go of everything, Elon. It's about letting others carry some of the load. You've surrounded yourself with incredible people. People who can take on the mantle and push things forward. You don't have to be the one to carry it all." The words hit him hard. The realization that he didn't have to do it alone, that there were people in his life who could help carry the burden, was almost foreign to him. But deep down, he knew Karen was right. He had surrounded himself with people he trusted, and it was time to let them step up. For the first time in months, Elon allowed himself to truly feel the weight of everything he had been carrying. He had always prided himself on being the one who could handle it, but now, as he looked at his life, the toll it had taken on his mental health, his relationships, and his sense of self, he knew something had to change. "I'm scared," Elon admitted. The words felt raw, and for a brief moment, he wondered if Karen would see him as weak. But instead, she simply nodded. "I know you are," she said quietly. "But being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And you don't have to do this by yourself." Elon exhaled, a mixture of relief and anxiety swirling inside him. It wasn't going to be easy. Letting go, trusting others, asking for help, it wasn't in his nature. But for the first time in a long time, he could see a way forward. It wasn't about abandoning his companies or his dreams. It was about finding a new way to lead, one where he didn't have to sacrifice everything else in the process. As he hung up the phone, Elon realized something he had been avoiding for too long: the cost of his ambition had been higher than he was willing to admit. But it wasn't too late to change. There was still time to find balance, still time to rebuild the parts of his life that had been left in the dust. He wasn't sure what the next steps would look like, but for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Elon Musk stood in front of the glass walls of his office, staring out over the vast expanse of the Tesla factory. His mind buzzed with ideas, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't feeling the usual rush of excitement. Instead, a quiet sense of determination was growing inside him. He had always been the visionary, the one who pushed everyone, including himself, to the limits. But now, it seemed like it was time for a new approach, one that didn't rely on his own relentless drive to lead. It had been a few days since his conversation with Karen, and as much as he hated to admit it, he knew she was right. The pressure, the sleepless nights, the constant grind, it had been taking its toll on him. More importantly, it was taking its toll on the people around him. The very people who had helped him build Tesla and SpaceX into the powerhouses they were today. Elon had always believed in the idea that leadership was about showing the way, about taking risks and making the tough calls. But he was beginning to understand that leadership was also about trusting those around him, empowering them to take on the challenges he had carried alone for so long. It wasn't about relinquishing control, it was about finding balance, about finding strength in others. The decision had been made, he needed to step back. But that didn't mean stepping away completely. He would still be involved. He would still provide the vision, the direction, but he had to trust his team to execute it. To make the tough decisions when he wasn't around. To lead, even when he wasn't in the room. As he walked into the conference room, he was greeted by his leadership team, Karen, Patricia, and the heads of various departments. They were all aware of the growing tension in Elon's life, but they were also committed to the future of the company. They had weathered the storms together before, and now, they were ready to face this new challenge. "Elon," Karen said, her voice steady, "we're all here to support you. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." "I've been thinking," Elon began, his voice calm but firm. "We've come a long way, and I'm proud of everything we've built. But it's clear to me now that I can't keep doing it all. I need to trust you more, trust you to lead, to make decisions, and to push the boundaries even when I'm not around." The room fell silent. It was a moment of vulnerability for Elon, one that was rare for him. The people around him had always looked to him for answers, for guidance. And now, he was asking them to step into the leadership roles he had held for so long. It was a bold move, one that would require change on everyone's part. "I've spent so much time focusing on the big picture," Elon continued, "that I've neglected the little things. The day-to-day. The relationships. It's time for me to find a balance, to step back when I need to, and to trust you all to take the reins. I know that doesn't mean I'm disappearing. I'm still here. I'll still lead the vision. But it's time for all of us to lead in our own ways." Karen smiled, the weight of the moment lifting as she saw the sincerity in Elon's eyes. "You've always been the visionary, Elon. But now it's our turn to carry the torch. And we're ready for it." Patricia, who had always been a more pragmatic voice on the team, added, "We've got this, Elon. We've always had your back, and we always will. But you're right, we need to trust each other more. This is the future of Tesla and SpaceX, and it's not just your future. It's all of ours." As the meeting continued, Elon began to feel a new sense of purpose, one that didn't involve constantly running at full speed. He could still innovate, still lead the way, but it didn't have to be at the cost of his own well-being. It didn't have to be at the cost of his relationships. The team was ready to step up, and so was he. But as the conversation shifted to the upcoming projects, the air taxi prototype, and the electric vehicle advancements, Elon couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness. This was uncharted territory for him. Letting go wasn't easy. The weight of leadership had been with him for so long that the idea of sharing it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Later that afternoon, as he walked out of the office and into the bright California sun, Elon found himself reflecting on the changes that were taking place. There was still so much work to do, so many challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a team that was truly behind him. He wasn't alone in this anymore. As he drove to his next meeting, Elon couldn't help but smile. There was something liberating about letting go, about stepping into a new kind of leadership, one that was about trust, collaboration, and shared vision. The future, it seemed, was brighter than ever. Elon Musk sat in the back of the sleek, black Tesla as it glided through the streets of Palo Alto. The landscape outside blurred by, his thoughts still lingering on the meeting he'd just left. His decision to delegate, to trust others with the reins of Tesla and SpaceX, had been a step in the right direction, but it was a step into the unknown. The upcoming air taxi project was about to face its biggest test yet, and there was no escaping the pressure. The air taxi prototype had been one of Elon's boldest ideas. The future of urban mobility depended on it, a fleet of autonomous, electric flying vehicles that would revolutionize transportation. It wasn't just about innovation anymore, it was about legacy. If the project failed, it would be a significant setback for the entire company, and worse, it would shake the confidence of investors and consumers in his ability to deliver on groundbreaking promises. Elon had handed the responsibility of overseeing the project to his top engineers and his trusted team, including Patricia. Patricia had been with him from the early days, and her brilliance in solving complex problems had earned her a place as one of the key leaders at Tesla. She was sharp, meticulous, and had an eye for detail that few could match. But now, with the air taxi project reaching a critical stage, she was facing unforeseen setbacks that would test everything she had learned under Elon's leadership. As the car pulled into the Tesla headquarters parking lot, Elon felt a familiar surge of anxiety. He had learned to mask it, to bury it beneath his relentless drive, but today felt different. He wasn't there to lead the charge himself. He was relying on others, and it was a far harder challenge than he'd anticipated. Walking into the building, Elon immediately spotted Patricia, who was standing near the central design board, surrounded by a group of engineers. Her expression was tight, and there was a hint of frustration in the way she spoke with the team. The prototype, which had shown so much promise, was now struggling with several key issues. The flight stabilization system was malfunctioning, and despite countless simulations, they hadn't been able to get it to perform as expected. Elon approached the group quietly, observing the situation before speaking. Patricia turned to him as soon as she saw him, her face softening slightly. "We've hit a wall," she said, her voice low. "The system isn't responding the way we thought it would. We're getting a lot of instability in the test flights, and every time we tweak it, we end up creating new problems." Elon could see the weight of the situation on her shoulders. This was the test. This was the moment where trust was either earned or lost. Patricia had always been one of the most capable people on his team, but in this moment, the pressure was overwhelming. It wasn't just about fixing a glitch. It was about the future of Tesla, and potentially the future of transportation itself. "What's the plan?" Elon asked, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. He didn't want to come across as too critical, but the reality was unavoidable. If they didn't fix this, the consequences would be massive. Patricia ran her fingers through her hair and looked at him with determination. "We've been working around the clock. We're making progress, but we need more time. We need more testing. And we need to think outside the box." Elon nodded. Time. That was always the problem, wasn't it? Time was the one resource that he could never get enough of. Time to innovate, time to fail and try again, time to adjust course. But as much as he hated to admit it, he wasn't the only one who needed to be patient. Patricia continued, "I know it's a lot of pressure. But we can't afford to rush it. If we do, we'll end up with something that isn't ready for public release. And I don't want to risk that. I'm not willing to take that shortcut." Elon studied her face, seeing the resolve there. For a moment, he was reminded of his own early days with Tesla, when he had pushed himself and his team beyond the limits to make sure every piece was perfect. It wasn't always about doing it fast, it was about doing it right. "I trust you," Elon said, his words carrying more weight than he had intended. "I know this team can fix it. I just don't want to lose momentum." Patricia gave him a small but appreciative smile. "We won't lose momentum. We're just going to be smart about this. We'll get it right. I know we will." Elon took a deep breath and let the tension in his shoulders ease just a bit. He wasn't taking control of the situation. He wasn't stepping in to solve the problem himself. For the first time, he was letting go completely and trusting Patricia and the team to handle it. But the reality was still heavy on his mind. This wasn't just any project. It wasn't just about a product. This was the future of Tesla, and possibly the future of electric and autonomous transportation. It had to work. There could be no failure. Still, Elon realized that this was the challenge he had been looking for, a test not just of technology, but of leadership. It wasn't about how well he could carry the load on his own, it was about how well he could empower those around him to solve the problems that seemed insurmountable. Patricia looked back at the engineers and spoke to them with the same confidence that had carried her through countless other challenges. "We're going to take a step back, do some more tests, recalibrate, and come up with a new strategy. We've got this." The team nodded, and there was a sense of collective determination in the room. Elon could feel it. It wasn't the type of pressure that came from fear, it was the pressure of a team committed to solving a problem, a team that was united in its resolve. It wasn't just about getting the project done, it was about making sure they did it right. Before leaving the room, Elon turned to Patricia and said, "I believe in you. I believe in this team. Keep me updated." As he walked out, Elon felt a shift within himself. The weight of responsibility was still there, but it felt different now. He had trusted his team, and they were doing the work. It wasn't just about leading with his vision anymore. It was about leading with trust. And for the first time, Elon Musk was beginning to understand that sometimes, the most important part of leadership wasn't being the one to carry the load, it was being the one who trusted others enough to let them carry it too. The following weeks felt like a blur. Elon couldn't quite remember when the last time was that he'd truly rested. His mind was constantly occupied with the state of the air taxi project. While he had taken a step back, the weight of responsibility for the project's success, or failure, still loomed large. But this was a critical moment, a turning point. His team was doing their best, but even he couldn't shake the nagging sense that they might be running out of time. Patricia and her team had worked tirelessly to correct the glitches in the flight stabilization system, but the tests were still failing. The vehicle's balance was unstable at high altitudes, and the system kept generating errors under certain conditions. Every iteration of fixes resulted in new problems, and despite the team's relentless efforts, the air taxi prototype was no closer to taking flight than it had been when Elon first handed the project over to them. Elon sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, which displayed yet another report on the air taxi's performance. The figures were disheartening. The team had tried every possible approach, but the air taxi still wasn't ready. It felt like they had hit an insurmountable wall, one that no amount of ingenuity or hard work could break through. Elon's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Patricia. "Meeting at 2 p.m. I think we need to talk about the next steps. I'll explain more when you get here." Elon's stomach twisted. This was the conversation he had been dreading. Whatever Patricia had to say, it wasn't going to be easy to hear. But he had to be ready. He had made the decision to trust his team, and now he had to follow through, no matter what the outcome was. At precisely 2 p.m. Elon entered the conference room, where Patricia and the rest of the engineering team were gathered around the table. The mood in the room was heavy. No one was smiling. No one was offering their usual words of encouragement. Elon could feel the pressure building as he took a seat at the head of the table. Patricia cleared her throat, her expression grim. "Elon," she began, "we've reached a point where we need to make a decision. The air taxi prototype is simply not performing as we'd hoped. Despite our best efforts, the stabilization issues are persistent, and we haven't found a way to fix them." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had prepared himself for this moment, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. The project that had consumed so much of his energy, the one he had believed would change the future of transportation, was on the verge of failure. "We've tried everything," Patricia continued. "We've poured resources into this, and the team has worked around the clock. But it's becoming clear that we might not be able to make the air taxi viable anytime soon. At least not in the way we originally envisioned." Elon's mind raced. What did this mean? Was the dream of autonomous flying taxis over? Would this be a monumental failure for Tesla? For SpaceX? For him? He leaned forward in his chair, looking each of them in the eye. "So, what are you proposing?" Patricia exhaled slowly, clearly hesitant. "We need to pause the project. Take a step back and reassess. We've invested a lot of time, money, and effort into this, but we may need to rethink the entire approach. Maybe we need to explore a different kind of vehicle, one that's more grounded in what's achievable in the short term. Or, at the very least, put a hold on the prototype while we work through these issues in smaller, more manageable stages. Elon felt his chest tighten. This wasn't what he wanted to hear. He had always prided himself on pushing boundaries, on finding solutions no one else could. To pause a project was anathema to his way of thinking. But at the same time, he knew that rushing the air taxi to market before it was ready could do more harm than good. Patricia's words hung in the air as the room fell silent. The engineers around the table exchanged uneasy glances, waiting for Elon's response. They had all seen him face obstacles before, but this was different. This was a failure of vision, a failure of a dream that had been so carefully nurtured for years. Elon exhaled, his mind spinning. The road ahead was unclear. He had trusted his team to handle this, but now the reality was inescapable. His decision to step back, to allow others to lead, had brought him to this moment. It was a test of trust, yes, but also a test of resilience. How could they, move forward from this? He looked at Patricia, her eyes full of uncertainty. I don't want to give up on this, he said slowly. But I also don't want to make a decision that could harm everything we've built. I trust you and this team. If you think we need to pause, then we'll pause. But I need to know that we're not giving up, we're just regrouping. I can't accept defeat. Not yet. Patricia nodded, her expression softening. We're not giving up, Elon. We're just being pragmatic. We'll learn from this, and we'll come back stronger. That's how we've always operated. Elon looked around the table, his gaze settling on each engineer. I've always believed that failure isn't the end. It's just another opportunity to learn. We've learned a lot from this project already. We'll keep pushing. But we need to be smart about it. If we pause, we come back stronger. That's a promise. As Elon left the meeting, he felt the weight of the decision settle in. It wasn't easy to step back. It wasn't easy to accept that something he had invested so much of himself into might not work out the way he had hoped. But in that moment, Elon realized something crucial: leadership wasn't just about making the boldest moves. It was also about knowing when to pivot, when to pause, and when to trust the people around you. He didn't have all the answers, but that didn't mean he couldn't find them. This was a challenge, yes, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to learn, grow, and ultimately build something even better. The days following the decision to pause the air taxi project were a mix of contemplation and intense regrouping. Elon had never been one to rest on his laurels, and even though he had agreed with Patricia's assessment that they needed a break, the wheels in his mind were still turning. There were endless possibilities, but the most important question lingered: could they turn the setback into an opportunity? Elon wasn't used to being idle. The truth was, he hadn't had much of a chance to step back from the madness of his companies in years. Every moment of his life had been consumed by the relentless pursuit of innovation, often sacrificing personal time and peace in the process. But now, for the first time, he found himself in a space where he had to pause, reassess, and think about the future differently. Patricia and her team had already begun brainstorming new ideas, approaching the problem from angles they had previously dismissed. And Elon could see the determination in their eyes, the same passion that had driven Tesla's earliest successes, the same drive that had put them on the cutting edge of technology. Despite the massive challenges, he could feel the spark of hope igniting once more. One early morning, Elon met with Patricia in his office. It had become their routine in the days following the pause, brainstorming, troubleshooting, and thinking about what the future could look like without the constraints of time looming over them. They sat across from each other, a whiteboard covered in sketches and diagrams that represented their evolving ideas for the future. So, what do we have? Elon asked, his voice calm, but his eyes were sharp. He wasn't asking just for the technical updates. He wanted to see the fire in Patricia's eyes. He wanted to know that she, and the rest of the team, still believed they could pull off something extraordinary. Patricia sat up straighter, pushing her glasses up her nose. Well, after looking at the data again and analyzing the areas we've been struggling with, we've come up with a different approach. It's not going to be the flying car we envisioned originally, but it's an improvement on what we already have. We think we can build a smaller, more agile vehicle that can be tested in a smaller market. Elon raised an eyebrow. A smaller market? What do you mean by that? Patricia gestured to the whiteboard, where she had sketched a compact version of the air taxi, one that was built to operate in dense urban areas but with a much lower risk of failure in the testing phase. Instead of launching it as a mass-market product, we focus on smaller cities with less complex air traffic. That way, we can iron out the kinks without risking widespread failure. Think of it as a proof of concept that can evolve into something bigger. Elon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. This was a bold pivot, but it made sense. Perhaps they had been too focused on grandeur and hadn't given enough attention to the scalability of the project. Testing it in less congested areas first could provide valuable data without the intense pressure of a major city's infrastructure. That's a good idea, Elon said, leaning forward. And how soon do we think we can start deploying prototypes in those cities? Patricia smiled, a glimmer of excitement returning to her eyes. With the right resources, we could have something ready for testing within a few months. We just need to scale down the tech a bit, optimize the flight system, and refine the vehicle's safety features. But it's doable. Elon couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. It wasn't the grand vision he had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. And for someone who was accustomed to high-risk, high-reward thinking, he understood the value of taking calculated steps when the odds weren't in their favor. "You've got my full support," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Let's put everything we've got into making this work. But let's keep it small, keep it contained. If we can prove this concept, then we'll have something we can scale later." Patricia nodded, clearly relieved that Elon had embraced the pivot. She had been nervous about proposing such a drastic shift, but she trusted that his willingness to adapt would bring the team back from the brink. "We'll start with a pilot city. A test zone where we can monitor every detail and ensure everything is as smooth as possible," Patricia added. "We'll learn from that and build on it." Elon looked at the whiteboard again, the sketches of the new air taxis now taking shape in his mind. He could see the potential. It wasn't the flying vehicle that would dominate major cities overnight, but it could serve as a foundation for something bigger. And in many ways, that was the kind of approach Tesla had taken with their electric vehicles and SpaceX with reusable rockets. "All right, then," Elon said with a satisfied nod. "Let's make this happen. We're not backing down. We're just rethinking the way forward. I'll get the resources you need." As Elon left the meeting, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was something powerful about embracing failure. The truth was, no one succeeded without encountering setbacks. What mattered wasn't whether you stumbled, it was how you got back up, how you adapted, and how you learned from the experience. For the first time in a while, Elon felt as though the path forward was clearer. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be plenty more challenges to face. But for the first time since the pause, he was confident that they were on the right track. Meanwhile, the engineering team, now more unified than ever, began working on the new prototype. There was a sense of hope in the air. The stakes were still high, but they were ready for whatever came next. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress, and with progress came the possibility of greatness. The day had finally arrived. After weeks of reworking the air taxi concept, the team was ready for their first real test flight of the newly designed prototype. It was a pivotal moment. The entire project had been reimagined from the ground up. The stakes couldn't be higher. If this flight went well, it would prove they were on the right track. If not, the consequences could be disastrous, both for the project and for Elon's reputation as an innovator. Elon stood in the control room of the testing facility, overlooking the airstrip. The new design was parked on the runway below, a sleek, compact vehicle with a distinct shape. It was smaller than the original vision, but that was by design. This was a vehicle made to fly in smaller cities, without the overwhelming complexity of major metropolitan air traffic. This time, they weren't aiming for grandeur, just success. Patricia was beside him, her eyes glued to the monitors that displayed every critical detail of the vehicle's systems. She had been deeply involved in the redesign process, overseeing every technical element. The flight stabilization system had been completely overhauled, and there was cautious optimism in the air. "This is it," Patricia said, her voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "The next few minutes will tell us everything." He glanced at the small team of engineers who were clustered around the other monitors in the room. Their faces were a mix of anxiety and hope, as they, too, understood the gravity of this moment. Every eye in the room was focused on the screens that would reveal the results of the flight. "All right, let's go," Elon said finally, breaking the silence. "Take her up." The ground crew on the runway signaled that everything was clear. The countdown began. Seconds stretched into minutes as everyone in the control room held their breath. Elon kept his eyes on the screen, watching as the vehicle's engines powered up, its rotors spinning to life. It was a small thing, relatively speaking, but to him, it felt like the culmination of years of work, ambition, and determination. The vehicle lifted off the ground with a smooth ascent. The team's collective sigh of relief was palpable. Elon's shoulders relaxed slightly as he allowed himself a brief moment of hope. They were off the ground, and everything was looking stable. For the next few minutes, the vehicle hovered in place as it climbed to a higher altitude. The flight systems seemed to be functioning as expected. Patricia and her team were closely monitoring every aspect of the flight, from the stability of the rotors to the responsiveness of the vehicle to control commands. "This is good," Patricia muttered under her breath, her eyes flicking across the various gauges. "I think we're on track." Elon couldn't help but feel the spark of excitement flicker inside him. He had seen Tesla cars take their first test drives, seen SpaceX rockets launch into space, and every time, there was a moment of pure exhilaration. This was no different. The future of transportation was right here in front of him. But just as he began to allow himself to feel some optimism, the vehicle suddenly began to wobble in the air. The flight systems flickered, and an alarm sounded. Patricia's eyes widened, and she leaned forward. "Elon, we've got a problem," she said, her voice tight with tension. "The stabilization system is failing. It's not responding as expected." Elon's heart rate shot up. He felt a rush of adrenaline. This was the moment that would define everything. They had worked so hard to get here, and now it seemed like they were on the brink of failure once again. The vehicle's wobbling increased, and the alarms intensified, a loud, insistent noise that filled the room. "What's happening?" Elon demanded, his voice sharp. "Why isn't it stabilizing?" Patricia's hands were a blur on the keyboard as she frantically tried to troubleshoot the issue. "The flight control systems are being overwhelmed. We might have pushed the prototype too far with the weight adjustments. It's a lot to manage with the smaller frame, and the sensors are having trouble keeping up." Elon's mind raced. What had they missed? They had accounted for weight and size, hadn't they? Everything had been checked multiple times. But now, with the vehicle clearly struggling to maintain altitude, it was apparent that something had gone wrong. The engineers in the room exchanged worried glances, their faces a mix of frustration and disbelief. They had believed this new version would work. It was supposed to be simpler, more efficient. But now, they were watching as their creation veered off course. "Can we correct it manually?" Elon asked, though he knew it was a long shot. Patricia's hands were steady on the controls, but her brow furrowed. "I'm trying, but it's not responding the way it should. We may have to abort the test." Elon's mind flashed back to the countless times he had faced adversity. He remembered SpaceX's early failures, rockets exploding in mid-air, costly setbacks, but they had always found a way to bounce back. It wasn't about the failures themselves, it was about how they responded. He turned to Patricia, his voice calm but determined. "Don't stop. We've gotten this far. We fix this. We're not giving up now." Patricia nodded, her fingers moving with precision as she worked through the technical issues. The wobbling was still there, but they could see it slowing. The vehicle was stabilizing, albeit slowly. Then, with a sudden jolt, the vehicle made a sharp turn to the left, throwing off the balance. Everyone in the control room gasped, and Elon's heart skipped a beat. It was teetering on the edge of disaster. But then, something incredible happened. The vehicle righted itself. The wobbling ceased. It was as though the system had recalibrated on its own, the flight stabilization finally kicking in as it was meant to. "Got it!" Patricia exclaimed, her voice filled with relief. "It's holding steady." Elon watched in awe as the vehicle leveled off, hovering steadily in place. The alarm that had been blaring now fell silent, and the room was filled with a collective sigh of relief. They had done it. Against all odds, the prototype had flown, and survived. Elon leaned back in his chair, his breath coming in slow, measured bursts. "This is just the beginning," he muttered under his breath. It wasn't perfect. There was still work to be done. But for the first time in weeks, Elon felt the weight lift off his shoulders. They had faced failure, they had fought through it, and now, they had a foundation to build on. The air taxi prototype had passed its first test flight, but it was clear that there were still many obstacles ahead. The wobble, the near-disaster moments, and the last-minute stabilization success were fresh in everyone's minds. The team had pulled through a tense moment, but the road to a fully functional air taxi was far from over. In the days following the test, Elon had gathered the team for a debrief. He sat at the head of the conference table, a rare stillness in his usually relentless demeanor. Patricia stood by the whiteboard, going over data, graphs, and potential adjustments that needed to be made before they could even consider another test flight. "All right, let's break it down," Elon said, his voice steady. "We got the vehicle off the ground. That's a huge win. But we saw some issues with stability and control. I need to know, from everyone, what we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again." Patricia stepped forward, marking a few points on the whiteboard. The main issue was with the weight distribution and how it affected the stabilizer system. The frame of the vehicle was designed for more vertical lift, but the weight adjustments we made in scaling it down didn't optimize the center of gravity the way we needed it to. We'll need to tweak the propulsion system as well as the weight distribution for better balance. The team nodded, and Elon could see that the engineers were ready to dive into the next phase of repairs and recalibration. Patricia continued, "We've also learned that the stabilization system is sensitive to minor malfunctions. It's likely that the sensor interference during the test flight caused the vehicle to lose its balance at the start. Our main priority now should be building redundancy into the system, something that will kick in automatically when one part of the system fails." Elon absorbed the information carefully. He had always appreciated Patricia's practical approach, her ability to find solutions while keeping the bigger picture in mind. "So we're not scrapping the design. We just need to refine it." "Exactly," Patricia replied, pointing at the whiteboard. "We can modify the sensor systems, adjust the propulsion parameters, and do more controlled test runs to ensure that this issue doesn't occur again. It's not about abandoning what we've started, it's about making the necessary adjustments to get to the next stage." Elon looked around the room, taking in the team's focused expressions. Despite the challenges, there was a sense of determination that permeated the space. He felt it too, a renewed resolve to press forward. The setbacks were real, but they weren't insurmountable. After all, he had faced much worse before. "You all did well," Elon said with a slight nod of approval. We could have abandoned the test when things went wrong, but we stuck with it and got the result we wanted. Now, let's fix what needs fixing and move ahead. There was a palpable sense of confidence in the room now. The team was more energized than before. They had learned something invaluable during the first test flight: failure was part of the process. The goal wasn't perfection on the first try, but progress with each iteration. Later that afternoon, Elon and Patricia met for a private conversation in his office. The technical adjustments and changes needed were clear, but Elon wanted to know more about how Patricia was feeling about the project. She had worked tirelessly on this design, and while she was undoubtedly one of the best engineers he knew, Elon understood that the emotional weight of these challenges could be a lot to bear. "So, how are you holding up?" Elon asked, leaning back in his chair. "I know this project is a lot to juggle." Patricia paused, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's exhausting, but I'm excited. I know we're close. That first test flight was everything we needed to see. We're not far from something groundbreaking. I can feel it." Elon smiled back. He had seen this kind of determination in Patricia before. The fire was still there, burning bright. It was contagious. "You've got my full support," Elon said, his tone earnest. "I know how much you've invested in this, and we're not going to quit now. I want you to lead this project and make sure we're fixing the systems. We'll keep iterating until it works." Patricia's expression softened with appreciation. "Thanks, Elon. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," he replied. "I've seen you overcome much bigger challenges. This is just the beginning, Patricia." The next several weeks were intense, with the team working long hours to refine the vehicle. New systems were put in place to enhance stability, the propulsion system was reworked, and additional flight tests were scheduled. Elon was a constant presence, overseeing progress but also offering space for the team to solve problems on their own. He knew better than anyone that innovation came from collaboration, not micromanagement. The tension in the room during each test was palpable, but with each attempt, they were one step closer to success. The setbacks that had once seemed insurmountable now felt like opportunities for growth. Elon knew that the greatest companies in the world weren't built on success alone, they were forged through perseverance in the face of adversity. One morning, a few months after the first test, Elon stood on the runway again, watching the redesigned air taxi hover steadily in the air. The vehicle was stable, controlled, and operational. A few minutes later, it performed a smooth landing, much to the relief of the engineers. Elon's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't perfect yet, but they had come a long way. And with every step, they were getting closer to bringing something truly revolutionary to the world. As he walked over to Patricia, who was reviewing the flight data, he couldn't contain his excitement. "This is it. We've cracked it." Patricia looked up, her eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "It's just the beginning, Elon. But yeah, this is a big step." Elon looked out at the sky, imagining a future where this vehicle was just one part of an entire transportation revolution. He saw a world where air taxis were as common as cars, where cities were no longer choked by traffic, where the promise of a sustainable future was more than just an idea, it was a reality. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more obstacles, more tests, and more doubts along the way. But in that moment, as he stood beside the team that had fought through it all, Elon knew one thing for sure: he had found a group of people who shared his vision and his drive to make the impossible possible. And that, more than anything, was the true power of innovation. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?